Coming up on this episode.
What does it look like? Well, it's made of 5 elements. Firstly, flag on the hill. Secondly, information flow. Thirdly, decentralised decision making. Fourthly, dynamic subordination. And fifth, and most importantly, trust. I'm going to break all 5 of them down for you to explain exactly what they mean. That traditional way of managing and leading teams absolutely can be helpful in this environment. But in a complex and uncertain environment, it's too slow. Decisions need to be able to be made quicker than that in order to elicit the most effective outcome. And so a progression from that might be command of teams. And we see this quite often in a lot of organisations nowadays, where you have a bunch of really highly effective teams operating within an organisation. Do you let expertise lead on projects or tasks? Are the ones that are expert in it the ones that are making the decisions because they understand it better? And do people trust each other enough to say what needs to be said without fear of provocation off the back of it?
Welcome to the People Performance Podcast. The People Performance Podcast is made up of 3 series. First up, we have the Leader Lounge episodes with founder of T2, Martin Johnson. Then we have the guest interview episodes. And finally, we have our performance episodes delivered by our very own T2 consultants. For now, sit back, tune in and enjoy the People Performance Podcast.
Welcome to the People Performance Podcast Leader Lounge with me, Alex Mather. Today, I'm going to talk about a concept called team of teams. Now, on the face of it, that might sound like a pretty obvious thing to talk about. There's lots of organisations out there that talk about teams within teams and teams working together. Most organisations nowadays talk about things like teamwork, collaboration, breaking down silos, joined up thinking, working together. But what does team of teams actually mean in the context of all that? And how do you take those ideas and those principles and apply them into something that actually feels like it's going to move your organisation forward? Inside organisations, you'll often find lots of strong teams that are full of talented, committed and hard-working individuals. And yet, despite those teams being there, progress and work within organisations can still feel slow, fragmented, reactive or misaligned. So, team of teams is the difference between teams performing individually and organisations operating together as one connected system. In this short podcast today, I'm hoping to guide you through exactly what teams of teams is, where it comes from, how it can help, and hopefully I'll leave you at the end asking some questions around where can you take your organisation next to make you more effective. So let's begin by talking about the origins of Team of Teams and where it came from. So General Stanley McChrystal was a special forces commander operating in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had the difficult task of identifying and figuring out how to make the most out of a group of elite special forces teams. Let's make no bones about it. He had resources that led him to the most effective operators on the planet. Special forces teams, multidisciplinary teams that were working in hostile environments, that were used to working in hostile environments. There was, and still is, an argument to be made that you will not find better special forces teams than the ones that General Stanley McChrystal had at his disposal. And yet, they still weren't achieving the outcomes that they were looking for. So why was that happening? Why were this group of elite teams not achieving the results that they set out to achieve? Well, what McChrystal discovered or figured out was that it was because the environment had changed. The surroundings and the place that they were trying to operate in wasn't familiar to them. Problems were moving faster. New information was emerging constantly. Threats were entirely unpredictable. Decisions were having to be made before the full picture had even formed. And what he was able to understand from that was that traditional models of command simply weren't able to work fast enough to cope with the challenge and uncertainty that existed within those environments. It's not that the teams weren't good enough. As I said before, these were elite teams, probably the best in the world that you'd be able to find. It's just that they weren't connected well enough. Now, I give an analogy there of the elite teams that Stanley McChrystal was dealing with, and you might be sitting there thinking, when I work in X organisation with X amount of people, it's as far away from a military operation as you could possibly think it would be. Well, actually, it's not that dissimilar, only on the basis that when things go wrong or when we don't achieve the outcomes that we're looking for within organisations, there can be a tendency to lean on the team's not effective enough, the manager's not effective enough, the function itself isn't effective enough. The answer doesn't necessarily lie within that. And what Team of Teams actually shows us is that very often the things that pull teams down and stop teams from performing can be from the handovers, the delays, the assumptions that are being made, the lack of context, the isolated decisions being made, the information that was received just a little bit too late, or the expertise that was either unheard or ignored. If you can build a system that, when joined together effectively, eliminates all of those things from happening, well, then your organisation becomes more effective. Your organisation or your military operation or anything that involves human beings being collected together and operating inside Team of Teams. So before we go into Team of Teams, let's look at some more traditional ways of operating in team networks. So the first one is a traditional command structure. So this is your traditional up and down, where decisions are made at the top and they filter down through an organisation. And when there are questions, questions go back up to the top, they're then answered, and it comes back down the organisation. Now, that can be very useful and very helpful in an environment where the situation is predictable, where it's stable. We know what the outcomes are. We know what's going to happen with this. That traditional way of managing and leading teams absolutely can be helpful in this environment. But in a complex and uncertain environment, it's too slow. Decisions need to be able to be made quicker than that in order to elicit the most effective outcome. And so a progression from that might be command of teams. And we see this quite often in a lot of organisations nowadays, where you have a bunch of really highly effective teams operating within an organisation. Now, what that leads to is teams that are very strong, that are very highly capable, and that do fantastic work on an individual team basis, though. The obvious issue, and the one that a lot of our clients here at T2 face, is that drives silo behaviour, a siloed mentality, where teams are focused on the outcomes for their team, not necessarily as much for the entirety of the organisation. Strong teams do not make a strong organisation. And so following on from that then is where we get to Team of Teams. Highly effective teams that are existing within a connected system, an ecosystem, if you want. They're not all doing the same thing. They're all doing different things, but they're all connected. And what those organizations are able to do, and what that group of teams then are able to do, is they're able to sense, respond, and adapt more quickly and more effectively. And I think this matters now more than ever before, really, because of the complexity that exists within the workplace. It's not just complication. Complication and complexity are two very different things. Things that are complicated can be very predictable. So it can be complicated, but you can predict and plot a path through it. Complexity is very different. Complexity is something where it throws things up at us where we're not quite sure what this is going to look like in the future. Complexity exists within today's working environment in the form of the constant change that we see from a geopolitical sense. It can be driven from things like hybrid working, from digital transformation, from public expectation or political pressure. We see complexity coming from financial pressures or the disruption or changes that are caused by AI. Workforce fatigue is a real, genuine thing in this age of 24-hour working. In an age where communications are always wanted to be faster. People want an answer, they want a response, and they want it now. All of that adds to complexity. And so leadership today then, by its very essence, has had to change. Leadership today is less about control and more about creating an environment for the system to work. If you create that environment, well, then the output and the effectiveness of your organisation goes up. That's what leadership looks like in 2026. And so if Team of Teams looks to build this or create this or help us move towards this way of managing and navigating our way through change and uncertainty and challenge, what does it look like? Well, it's made of 5 elements. Firstly, flag on the hill. Secondly, information flow. Thirdly, decentralised decision making. Fourthly, dynamic subordination. And fifth, and most importantly, trust. I'm going to break all 5 of them down for you to explain exactly what they mean. Let's start with flag on the hill. What do we mean when we say flag on the hill? Well, a flag on the hill is a shared purpose. And I'm not talking about a mission statement or something along those lines. A shared purpose is essentially your decision-making anchor. It's the way that teams within organisations articulate their mission. So what a decision-making anchor or a flag on the hill looks like within an organisation is something that allows teams to think about things in the sense of, does this move us closer to that goal? Does this align with what matters to us as an organisation? Does this help the wider system? Or is it just helping my part of the system? When you've got a very, very clear, contextualised flag on the hill, teams and the people within them find it far easier to answer those questions. When there's no flag, when there's no direction, or when it's a little bit unclear, well, people are then free to make their own interpretation. They're free to create their own list of priorities, decide what's important and what's not by themselves. Essentially look after their own local pressures. And what that causes is drift within a team. Scope drift in terms of what they're doing, what they're operating on, how they're operating on it, and why they're operating on it. And that drift causes misalignment, which rolls on to silo working, silo mentality, and fragments and breaks that really effective team of teams dynamic. So that's flag on the hill. The next element is information flow. Now, information flow is not the same as communication. Now, there is a lot in all the stuff that we do here at T2 and generally anywhere in terms of effective leadership that talks about effective communication. Information flow is not quite the same thing. So information flow is about the right information reaching the right people at the earliest possible stage. When we talk about effective communication or increased communication, we can just talk about the different dynamic ways in which we communicate. Information flow is very specific on the basis, as I'll say it again, the right information to the right people at the earliest possible opportunity. Because without doing that, what you end up with is slow and reactive responses as opposed to proactive responses. Duplicated effort from team to team to team. Old assumptions being used to govern decision making, and then decisions being made without the full picture that are actually in alignment with a previous image that happened rather than a current ongoing change, again within this complex and uncertain time. So information flow, really essential and important element of teams. The third one that I mentioned then, decentralised decision making. And what does that mean? So decentralised decision making means we take the responsibility for making decisions about this task or project or operation, and we place it closer to the work. So not all the decisions are happening at a distance. Now, let me be really clear. Decentralised decision making should happen where appropriate. There should and always will be those decisions that have to be made at a higher position or a higher rank, or however you want to term it. So there will always be some decisions that have to be made by the people in more senior positions. However, where possible, what we should be looking to do is to take some of those decisions and put them closer to the work where it's actually happening. So what people need in order to be able to do that, and to do that effectively, is they need clarity, they need to be given the capability to do that, and they need to be given the trust to do that. They also need to know the purpose behind what they're doing. They need to understand the boundaries, and they need to know what they can decide and what they need to escalate. It's not just a free-for-all where every single decision in that team is being made as close to the work as possible, as close to the coalface as possible. As I said before, some decisions still have to be made by more senior people. So a real clear understanding of what that difference is important. And absolutely, these people need to be trusted to act. And without those elements, if we just go about it and say, right, well, decentralised decision making, now all the decisions are on to you, well, you flirt then with the idea of leadership abandonment. That feels very much then like, well, you're just left to your own devices, just make your own decisions. So we've got to be careful that we don't move down that path too far that the team feel like they've been abandoned by the people in senior positions next to them. So again, clarity, capability, and trust born from knowing the purpose, understanding the boundaries, knowing what they can decide and what they need to escalate, and then letting them know that they're trusted to act. The fourth element then, dynamic subordination. That's a little bit of a weird term, dynamic subordination. It sounds a little bit strange maybe to some. But ultimately what it means is looking at where does the leadership sit on this? Who's leading this task or project or team in this? And what dynamic subordination suggests is that the leadership shifts to the relevant expertise. So the person who understands the biggest risk doesn't always hold the highest position. That doesn't remove leadership, as with decentralized decision making. That absolutely doesn't remove senior leadership. It just makes it more intelligent. Because when you've got expertise in the room, you've got people then that are able to respond to reality rather than rank. And then the fifth element, and absolutely the one that sits at the center of Team of Teams, is trust. Trust enables all the other factors within Team of Teams. Without it, people don't share information early enough. They don't challenge clearly and confidently. They don't ask for help when they need help. They don't admit mistakes. They don't make confident decisions. And they focus largely on protection for both themselves and their individual teams. Without it, the system moves much slower. So without trust, what you uncover is hidden costs everywhere because everything is moving at a much, much slower pace. So Team of Teams, really then, it's not just an operating model. It's a human challenge, I think, because it's not easy for people to do the things that are listed in Team of Teams. It's not as simple as just flicking a switch and now all of a sudden we're in a team of teams and aren't we so great operating more effectively? No, it's challenging. It's hard to do because what you're asking people to do in a team of teams situation is you're asking them to share information before it's perfect and before it's completely understood. You're asking leaders to relinquish a significant amount of control. You're asking teams to think beyond their own priorities. You're asking people to challenge some decisions that are being made, respectively, obviously, but yeah, you're asking them to challenge decisions that are being made. You're asking people to listen to expertise rather than rank, and to admit uncertainty or when they just don't know what something is or what it isn't. And for all of that to exist, then it needs to be within an environment of psychological safety. Psychological safety bears trust, and trust is at the centre of all of it. And so if you can build a psychologically safe environment as a starting point for Team of Teams, well, then you build an environment where people start to feel confident in saying things like, I'm concerned with X, or I disagree with that because I need help on this, or I think we're making an assumption there. Actually, this might affect another team, so maybe we should check in with them. Let's involve X team in this. I made a mistake. How do we fix it? Or I don't think we're quite aligned on this. Can we try and get more alignment? Those kinds of questions, those kinds of sentences are the lifeblood of Team of Teams. Those kind of sentences and statements are where Team of Teams thrives and exists. So we're not just talking about a structure change here. We're not just talking about a change of mindset on how you approach things. We're talking about a significant change in behaviour. A significant change in behaviour that needs to exist in order for people, teams and organisations to effectively thrive in 2026 in this vast environment of change and complexity and uncertainty. If we can create the conditions where the system can think, speak, decide and adapt well, then we can create conditions for our organisations to be much, much more successful. And so have a think about these questions in order to start thinking about Team of Teams and whether or not you're ready to move in that direction, or whether or not you might need us here at T2 to help you out with it a little bit. Firstly, your flag on the hill. Is it clear enough? Does everybody understand what it is? Is everybody using it as that decision-making anchor? Does the information that is shared within your organisation, does it move early enough? Or is it all a bit last minute? Are decisions being made at the right level? And by the right level, I don't mean the most senior level. I mean the level that is closest to the work. Do you let expertise lead on projects or tasks? Are the ones that are expert in it the ones that are making the decisions because they understand it better? And do people trust each other enough to say what needs to be said without fear of provocation off the back of it? If you said no to any of those, then the issue might not be the quality of the team involved in that. It might be the quality of the connections in and around that team. It might be the quality of how well that those teams are connected and the fact that they're maybe operating as a command of teams rather than a team of teams. But as I said before, if you've answered no to any of that and you're curious about it and you want to know a bit more about Team of Teams, how it works and how it can work for you, then just make sure you reach out to us at T2 and we can guide you through it. That's it from me today. It's been a pleasure talking to you about this, and hopefully I'll be back filling in for Martin again sometime soon. Thanks very much.
The People Performance Podcast, brought to you by T2.